All right, hello World Geography students. It's time for another quick World Geography review video, right smack dab in the middle of your Nearpod review. I hope you guys are enjoying those. A little change of pace from your regular OMHS reviews. So today we've been looking at human population and human migration. So I do want to spend some time talking about population and human migration in terms of world geography. So to get us started, first of all, when we're talking about human population and human migration, we're talking about population distribution. And remember, population distribution is basically looking at where people are living. Where are people living? And population distribution is described in two ways, through location and density. And remember, location is where they're living, and density is how many people are packed together. Because remember, density means people are packed and crowded together. Sparse means they're spread out. Now, characteristics of human populations, they differ over time and from region to region, and how fast a population grows is influenced by many different factors, including human, environmental, economic, and political factors. So there's a lot of different things that can impact how fast or how slow a particular population grows, or why people are living there in the first place. Okay, so let's look at some of those factors that influence where people live. Well, first of all, natural resources. If an area has good natural resources, people are going to want to settle near those natural resources. Same goes for climate. If the average weather for a specific region is not too hot, not too cold, not too wet, not too dry, that's where people tend to want to live. Economic development is another important factor that influences where people live. Is the region stable? Does it have economic success? That could influence whether or not people live there. Another big one is government policy. The political makeup. Is the country democratic or communist? That also plays a role in whether or not how fast the population is going to grow and if people choose to live in that particular country. For example, typically people want to move to democratic countries as opposed to communist countries. Some other factors that influence where people live are rural and urban settlement patterns. When we look at a country, we have to figure out, are more people living in the city, which is urban, or the country, which is rural? And typically, in a developed country, more people are going to live in urban city areas. This can be for a lot of reasons. Typically, they have good economic availability. Typically, they have good job resources. It can come for a lot of different reasons. Another factor that influences where people live are capital resources. How available are these man-made resources, such as transportation, technology, infrastructure, money? The use and availability of man-made resources is going to determine whether or not people want to live in that region. And finally, conflicts. Political or social unrest in a region. For example, we've talked quite a few times this year about refugees, people who are forced out of their home for either political or social or even environmental reasons. Those cause conflicts, and people are not going to want to live in those particular areas. Now, once we've figured out why people are living in a particular area, we need to actually look at the characteristics of the human population. Who are these people who make up the population, and what are some characteristics that they share? And how can we measure the success or the failure of a population? So whenever we look at a population of a particular region or country, one of the first things we look at is the birth and death rate. Now, obviously, this is pretty easy to figure out. The birth rate has to do with how many babies are being born each year, and the death rate is how many people are dying each year. And if you think about it, if you're going to be a thriving country, you obviously want your birth rate to be higher than your death rate. You want more people being born than people are dying because you want your population to grow. Another thing you're going to look at is the amount of people of different ages or age distribution. You're going to want to look at how many people are middle-aged, older age, and younger age. If that's not an even age distribution, then something's clearly wrong. For example, in many developing nations, most people in the country are under the age of 15. That means that at the age of 15, the amount of people in the age groups drops significantly, which is going to be very uneven. Another thing we're going to want to look at when we look at characteristics of human populations are male and female distribution. How many of each gender is in the country? We also want to look at the average length of someone's life or life expectancy. How long are people expected to live in this country or particular population? All right, some other characteristics of human population, and again, we're looking at people who make up the population. And again, when we're looking at a human population, we're not necessarily just looking at one country. We could be looking at one ethnic group, one religion, one region, one particular ethnic group in a region. We could be looking at a lot of different things. Another rate that people look at when they study the success or failure of a population is infant mortality rate, which is a really sad rate to be measured. That basically refers to the amount of babies who are under a year old that die before they, reach their first birthday. And this could be either because of malnutrition or lack of health care. It could be for any number of those reasons. But infant mortality rate looks at how many babies die before their first birthday on average. Another important characteristic of a human population, which I mentioned this earlier, is urban to rural distribution. How many people are living in cities versus how many people are living in the country. And as I said before, if more people are living in the city, that means they have good access to capital resources, they're coming in contact with modern technology. So in a developed nation, you're going to want to see more people living in urban areas as opposed to rural areas. And then we have gross domestic product, or GDP, which is the average income per person in that country per year. So obviously, the higher the GDP, the better off the human population is. Okay, some other characteristics of human populations, different things that you can look at when you're looking at a particular population of people. You're going to want to look at the different ethnicities, the different dialects or languages, as well as the different belief systems or religion that are found in that country, as well as the education system in that country. You're going to want to look at whether or not that country has many children have access to education, or if education is something that only a select few have access to. This is going to impact the success or failure of a population. Now, with a population, we obviously want to see populations grow. Now I want to take a look at factors that influence growth rates. Why is a region's population growing or not growing? Well, it could be growing or not growing for a number of different reasons. For one thing, availability of medicine. Obviously, if a region does not have good access to good health care or sanitary living conditions such as clean water and waste management, they are not going to have good chances of survival. Additionally, countries that do not have equal access to education, both primary and secondary schools, typically their growth is not a fast one. And finally, industrialization and urbanization. Now, industrialization is the use of machine labor over human labor. And the expansion of urbanization, remember, urbanization is when people are moving to the cities. So if a country has good access to modern medicine, good access to education, they are industrialized, they're becoming modernized, and people are moving to the city, typically we're going to see that population grow. But if a country does not have access to modern medicine, they don't have equal access to education, they are not relying on machines, and people are living in the countries, typically that population is not going to grow. Some other factors that influence growth rates, whether or not a region is growing or not growing, a region's population rather, are there job opportunities? What is the economic development like in that particular country? What type of government policy is there? As we discussed earlier in the video, typically populations grow under a democratic government as opposed to a communist government. Another interesting characteristic of whether or not a region's population grows has to do with the role of women. If there is equality for women in the workplace and society, populations tend to grow faster. Now, remember, when we're talking about human migration, we're talking about different reasons why people are moving and not moving to different areas. So, for example, we have push factors and pull factors, which you guys reviewed today. Remember, a push factor is something that is forcing a person to flee or leave their country, whereas a pull factor is something that is drawing or attracting a person to a specific country or region. And all of the things we just discussed, factors that influence growth rates, are either push factors or pull factors. Now, finally, all of this human migration, and remember, migration refers to humans moving from one place to another. Immigration is when people are coming in. Emigration is when people are exiting. All of this migration has an impact on regions around the world. It impacts new languages. New languages are spoken and mixed with other cultures. It impacts religion. There's freedom of worship or to practice your religion, as well as the mixing of religious ideas. And then the migration of different cultures also impacts different customs and traditions that can be shared around the world. So, in summary, migration is a big part of world geography, and looking at how fast a population grows and what factors are influencing growth rates can really have a very large impact of how fast a population is going to grow, as well as whether or not people are going to move to that particular area. All right, great job, everybody. I think now it's time for you to head back to Nearpod and complete your review questions, and then go to the OMHS and complete that SOL quiz for today. Let me know if you have any questions about this. I'll talk to you guys soon.